The market square was almost empty when Maren finished her work for the day. The sun had gone down an hour ago, and the sky above the town was the color of a bruise. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the stall where she had been selling apples and bread since dawn. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. Her fingers were stiff from the cold. She counted the coins in her small tin box. Not much. Enough for supper. Enough for tomorrow's flour. That was all she needed. She had learned a long time ago not to want more than she needed. The other sellers were packing up their carts. A woman named Nell called out a good night, and Maren waved back. The smell of wood smoke drifted from the chimneys of the houses that ringed the square. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a baby cried, and then went quiet. Maren pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was late autumn, and the wind that came off the river had teeth in it now. Her breath came out in small white clouds. The cobblestones under her worn boots were wet from the mist that had settled while she was packing, and she could feel the damp cold creeping up through the soles. She was almost ready to leave when she saw him. He sat at the edge of the square, on the low stone step of the old fountain, the way he always did at this hour. His coat was grey and patched. His boots were split at the toes. A wooden cup rested on the ground beside him, though he never seemed to shake it or call out for coins the way the other beggars did. He just sat there, straight-backed, with his hands folded in his lap, his face turned slightly upward as if he were listening to something the rest of them could not hear. Maren had noticed him 3 weeks ago. She had noticed, first, that he did not beg, he did not whine, he did not thank people too much or too little. When someone dropped a coin into his cup, he simply nodded once, calm and grave, as if the person had done a small and expected thing. She had noticed, second, that his eyes were pale and clouded, not the way an old man's eyes go milky with age. Something else. He turned his head when people passed, but not always in the right direction. Sometimes he looked at the sky when he should have looked at the ground. He was blind. Fully blind, she thought. She had noticed, third, that no one else seemed to see him at all. The fine ladies who came to buy ribbons walked past him as if he were a stone. The gentlemen with their tall hats stepped around him and never looked down. Even the children, who normally stared at anything strange, seemed to move past him without a glance. She could not explain why, but this bothered her more than anything else. 3 weeks ago, on a night much like this one, she had watched him try to stand up when the market closed. He had used a long, thin stick to feel his way. He had taken 2 steps, and then paused, listening. Then he had turned to the left when he should have turned to the right, and he had walked straight into a barrel that a merchant had left near the well. He had not cried out. He had simply steadied himself, tapped the barrel with his stick, adjusted his direction, and started again. But she had seen his hand shake when it touched the wood, and she had seen the small tightness in his jaw, and something inside her chest had gone soft and painful all at once. She had run to him that first night. She had said, "Sir, please let me walk with you. I go that way too." She had lied. She did not know which way he went. She only knew she could not let him wander through the dark streets alone. He had turned his head toward her voice. His pale eyes had not fixed on her face, but they had come close. And then he had smiled, just a little, the corner of his mouth lifting. "That is very kind," he had said. His voice was low, and even, with the kind of careful shape to it that suggested he had once been taught to speak well. "I would not wish to trouble you." "It is no trouble," she had said. "I go that way." And so they had walked together, and she had learned, that first night, that he lived in a small room above a cobbler's shop 3 streets away. She had learned that his name was Gideon. She had learned that he did not talk much, and that when he did, he chose his words like a man counting coins. She had walked him home every night since, 21 nights now. She had counted. She had counted the way a person counts anything that has quietly become important without asking permission first. Tonight, she picked up her basket and crossed the square to where he sat. "Gideon," she said softly. He turned his head. The corner of his mouth lifted in that small, calm smile. "Maren," he said. He always knew it was her. He always knew before she spoke sometimes, and she had wondered about that for a long time. She thought perhaps he knew her footsteps. She walked a little heavier on her left side because her right boot was newer and stiffer. Perhaps he had learned that. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am." She waited while he reached down for his cup and slid it into the deep pocket of his coat. He picked up his stick. He stood. He was tall, she thought, taller than she had first realized, because he always held himself straight and quiet, as if he were trying to take up less space than his body allowed. She offered her arm. He found it without needing her to guide his hand. His fingers rested on the crook of her elbow, light as a bird. They began to walk. The wind picked up as they crossed the square. It smelled of the river and of coal smoke, and of something bitter that Maren thought must be the tanner's yard down by the bridge. The sound of their footsteps on the wet stone seemed very loud in the empty market. "Cold tonight," Gideon said. "Very cold. You have only that thin shawl. It is enough." "It is not." She glanced up at him, surprised. It was the closest thing to a scolding she had ever heard from him. But his face was calm, turned forward, the pale eyes gazing at nothing. "I have a coat at home," she said, though she did not. She had sold her coat 3 winters ago to pay a doctor for her mother, and the money had not been enough, and her mother had died anyway. The coat had never come back. "I do not think you do," Gideon said quietly. She said nothing. They walked on. The streets grew narrower. The houses leaned toward each other, and the small windows glowed with the yellow of candle flame and hearth fire. Somewhere a fiddle was being played. Somewhere else a woman was singing to a child in a language that Maren did not know. "Tell me about your day," Gideon said. She always told him. It had become part of the walking. She told him what she had sold and what she had not. She told him about the woman who tried to bargain the price of a loaf down to nothing and had gone away angry. She told him about the small boy who had stolen an apple and how she had pretended not to see because his cheeks were hollow and his coat was too thin. She told him about Nell, who had a new grandchild. Gideon listened. He always listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer opinions unless she asked. But sometimes, when she said something small, he would nod once, gravely, as if she had spoken a truth worth marking. Tonight, when she told him about the boy and the apple, he was quiet for a long moment. "You have a soft heart, Maren," he said at last. "I have a foolish heart. That apple would have paid for my bread. Then you paid for his." She thought about that. The word settled into her the way a stone settles into still water. They reached the corner of Cobbler's Lane. The lamp there was lit, but the flame was low, and it threw more shadow than light onto the narrow street. Somewhere ahead a cat cried out and was answered. "Almost home," she said. Almost. They walked the last stretch slowly. She never knew, on any night, whether he wanted her to walk quickly and be done, or whether he wanted her to walk slowly so the walk might last a little longer. She had decided, some nights ago, that he wanted the latter. He never said so. But his hand never rushed her forward, and his steps never lengthened. They reached the door of the cobbler's shop. The shop was dark. Above it a single small window glowed dimly, as if a candle stub had been left burning. Gideon stopped. "Thank you, Maren. You are welcome." He did not release her arm right away. His fingers rested a moment longer than usual on the crook of her elbow. Then he let go. He turned toward the door. He found the handle with his stick, tapped it once, and reached for it. "Gideon," he paused. "Yes?" She did not know why she spoke. The words came out before she had thought them. "Do you have someone up there? Anyone at all?" The silence that followed was so long she thought he had not heard. But he had heard. His hand rested on the door handle. His face was turned slightly toward her. "No one," he said. "Not for a long time. Do you have supper?" "I have bread." "Only bread?" "It is enough." She reached into her basket. Her fingers found the small paper packet where she had wrapped a bit of cheese and half an apple that had been too bruised to sell. She had meant it for her own supper. She had meant it to be everything she had. She pressed the packet into his free hand. "For you," she said. He held it very still. His fingers closed around it slowly, as if he were feeling the shape of it, the weight of it, the small, honest kindness of it. His face did not change, but she thought his throat moved once, as if he had swallowed something difficult. "Maren, yes, you should not give me your supper. It is not my supper. It is only what did not sell." He knew she was lying. She could see it in the small tightness at the corner of his mouth. But he did not argue. He did not give the packet back. He simply held it, and then he tucked it carefully into the deep pocket of his coat where the wooden cup lived. "Good night, Maren. Good night, Gideon." She walked home through the dark streets. Her stomach growled. She did not mind. There would be a heel of bread on the shelf and a little water from the well, and she had gone to sleep on less. She thought about the way his fingers had closed around the packet. She thought about the small tightness at the corner of his mouth. She walked with her hand pressed to the front of her shawl as if she were holding something warm there. She did not know that in the small room above the cobbler's shop, a man who was not really a beggar sat down slowly on the edge of a narrow bed and held the paper packet in both his hands for a long time before he opened it. She did not know that he was not really blind at all. She did not know that his name was not only Gideon. She did not know that the pale, clouded look of his eyes came from a thin salve of goat's milk and flour that he applied each morning, and that under it his eyes were dark and clear, and had for 3 weeks been watching her. She did not know that his real title, whispered in the drawing rooms of the great houses of the county, was the Duke of Ashenmore, and that he had come to this town in disguise because he had been lied to too many times by too many people who wanted his name and his money and his land. She did not know any of this, and so she went home and ate bread and drank water and lay down on her thin straw mattress, and she thought about a blind man's pale eyes and the shape of his careful smile, and she fell asleep with her hand still pressed against her chest. The next morning began the way every morning began. Maren rose before the sun. She washed her face in cold water. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up with the same 2 pins she had used every day for 6 years. She put on her one grey dress and her worn apron. She swept her small room. She stepped out into the alley behind the baker's, where the smell of new bread hung thick and warm, and she began her walk to the market. She thought of Gideon. She thought of Gideon most mornings. She wondered if he had slept well. She wondered if he was warm. She wondered where he went during the day, because he was never in the square before the afternoon, and she had never dared to ask. At the market, she set up her stall the way she always did. The apples in one basket, the bread in another. A small stack of the honey cakes her neighbor had asked her to sell on his behalf. She counted her stock. She adjusted the cloth over the bread. She waited for the first customer. The morning passed. The afternoon came. And with the afternoon, as always, came Gideon. He came from the direction of the old bridge. He walked with his stick tapping softly ahead of him. He wore the same grey-patched coat. He kept his face turned very slightly downward, and his pale eyes did not fix on anything. But this time, Maren, who had never watched him closely as he arrived, watched him closely. She watched the way his stick moved. She watched the way his feet found the places between the cobblestones without stumbling. She watched the way he sat down at the edge of the fountain with a kind of quiet grace that a man who could not see the stone ought not to have. A small thought moved at the edge of her mind. She pushed it away. He is blind, she told herself. He is only careful. She served her customers. She sold a loaf. She sold 3 apples. A gentleman in a black coat bought 2 of the honey cakes and did not haggle. She wrapped them for him. She thanked him. She looked back to the fountain. Gideon was already turned slightly toward her stall. She could not have said later what had made her do it. Perhaps it was the way the light fell across his face just then. Perhaps it was the way her small thought would not stay pushed away. Perhaps it was only that she had walked him home 21 nights, and had begun to know the shape of him the way one knows the shape of a friend. She walked slowly around behind her stall. She picked up a small stone. She held it in her hand. She waited for a moment when there were no customers. Then she tossed the stone, gently, so that it landed a few feet in front of him with a small, clear sound. He flinched. It was tiny. It was the smallest flinch in the world. His shoulders tensed, his head turned, quickly and sharply, in the direction of the sound. His pale eyes did not look at the stone. But his whole body knew where the stone was. A blind man would have flinched at the sound, yes, but he would not have turned his head with such quickness, such precision. He would not have known, in that first half-second, which direction to face. Maren stood very still behind her stall. Her heart was beating oddly. She turned back to her apples. She arranged them carefully. Her hands did not shake, but they moved with the strange slowness of a person who has just seen something they do not yet understand. She did not test him again. She served her customers. She sold more bread. The afternoon wore on into evening. The sky went from gold to grey to the colour of an old iron pot. The other sellers began to pack. She looked at him again. He was sitting the way he always sat, straight-backed, hands folded, head turned slightly upward, the image of a patient, blind beggar. But she had seen him flinch. When the market was empty, she crossed to him. She did what she always did. She spoke his name softly. He turned. He smiled. She offered her arm. He found it. They began to walk. She did not tell him about the stone. She did not tell him what she thought she had seen. She only walked beside him, and talked of small things when he asked, and let his light hand rest on her elbow. But her mind was moving. Her mind was moving fast and quiet, the way a river moves under thick ice. They reached the door of the cobbler's shop. He thanked her. She said good night. He turned toward the door. His stick tapped the handle. He reached for it. Gideon, he paused. Yes, Maren? She looked up at his face. His pale eyes were turned toward her, but not quite at her. His mouth was calm. His whole body was the picture of a man who could not see. She almost asked him. The question rose to her lips. Why did you flinch at the stone? Who are you? What are you doing here? She did not ask. She did not know why she did not ask. Perhaps because he had been kind to her. Perhaps because she was afraid of the answer. Perhaps because she had walked him home 21 nights, and whatever else he was, he had also been the man who listened to her stories, and she was not ready to lose that. Sleep well, she said. And you, he answered. She walked home slowly. The wind bit through her thin shawl. She did not notice. 3 days passed. Maren walked Gideon home each night. She said nothing about the stone. She watched him carefully, but not in a way he could feel. She noticed small things now, the way his stick sometimes tapped a stone that was not there, and she began to suspect that he tapped it on purpose to seem more uncertain than he was. The way he sometimes looked upward at the sound of a bell in exactly the correct direction. The way, once when a horse cart came suddenly around a corner, he had stepped back before the sound of the hooves would have told him to. She began to think that Gideon was not blind at all. She did not know what to do with the thought. On the 4th day, something happened at the market that made everything different. It was late afternoon. The square was full of people. A cold rain had begun to fall, and the sellers were pulling cloths over their goods. Maren was reaching to protect her bread when she heard a voice she did not like. You there, apple girl. She turned. 2 men stood in front of her stall. One was tall and thin, with a hungry look and a dirty red scarf around his throat. The other was shorter and heavier, with a scar that pulled the left side of his mouth downward. She had never seen either of them before. May I help you? She asked, keeping her voice steady. How much for the whole basket? 6 pence. 6 pence. The tall one laughed. The laugh was not a nice sound. 6 pence for those little brown things? I would not give you 2. Then do not buy them. But we want them. He reached over the stall and picked up an apple. He turned it in his fingers. Then he took a bite of it, watching her chewing slowly. 2 pence, he said, with his mouth full. That apple is a penny. You just ate it. So you owe me 1 penny. I owe you nothing. The shorter man had moved to the side of the stall. He was reaching for the basket of bread. His fingers were dirty. Maren felt her heart begin to beat hard. Not with fear exactly, with a cold, careful anger. She had lived alone in this town for years, and she knew what men like these were, and she knew there was no one nearby who would help her. The rain was driving people indoors. The market was clearing. She looked at the shorter man's hand on her bread. Put that back, she said. Or what? Put it back, please, the tall one laughed again. He took another bite of the apple. The shorter one lifted a loaf out of her basket. Please, Maren said. Her voice was very quiet now, but the anger in it was solid. That is my bread. I baked it before the sun rose. Please put it back. Or what? Apple girl? There was a small sound from behind them, just the tap of a stick on the wet stones. Both men turned. Gideon stood there. He had come from the direction of the fountain, though Maren had not seen him arrive. His stick was in his hand. His pale eyes were turned toward the 2 men, and though the pale look of them still held, there was something in his face that had not been there before. His mouth was not soft. His shoulders were not stooped. He stood at his full height, and it was suddenly very clear that he was taller than either of them, and that his shoulders under the patched coat were broader than a beggar's shoulders had any right to be. Put the bread back, Gideon said. His voice was quiet, but it was not the careful, gentle voice Maren knew. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. The tall man laughed again, though the laugh was not as easy this time. Or what, blind man? Gideon did not answer. He took 1 step forward. Just one, but it was the step of a man who knew exactly where he was going and exactly where the 2 men stood. The rain hissed against the stones. Somewhere a shutter banged in the wind. The shorter man looked from Gideon to his companion. He looked at Gideon's face. He looked at the pale eyes. He looked at the shoulders under the coat. He put the bread back. Come on, he muttered. Not worth it. For a blind beggar? The tall one still had the half-eaten apple in his hand. Come on. The tall man threw the apple down onto the wet stones. It rolled into the mud. He spat next to it. He turned and walked away with the shorter man following, and the rain closed over them. And they were gone. Maren stood very still behind her stall. Her heart was beating hard now, harder than when the men had been there. She looked at Gideon. His face had already softened again. His shoulders had relaxed. The look of a beggar was returning to him like a coat he had briefly taken off and now put back on. Are you well? He asked quietly. I am well. Good. He did not ask her what had happened. He did not ask her what the men had wanted. He simply stood there with his stick, his pale eyes turned near her, but not quite at her, and waited. Maren looked at him. Really looked. The rain was falling on his hair. It was dark hair, dark under the wet, though threaded with a little grey. His face was thin. It was a face that had once been fed better than it was fed now. There was a small line between his brows, as if he were used to thinking about difficult things. She did not know who he was, but she knew, in that moment, that he was not what he had said he was. The market was empty now. The rain was heavier. The other sellers had gone home. Gideon, she said. Yes, how did you know they were bothering me? There was a pause. A small pause. He turned his head slightly, as if he were listening for something else, but his hand tightened on his stick. I heard them, he said. You heard them from the fountain. Yes, you heard their voices from that far over the rain, and you knew they were troubling me? Another pause. I know your voice, Maren. I know when it changes. She looked down at her basket. The bread was still there. The apples were still there. The rain was soaking into everything. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." Neither of them moved. She thought about the stone. She thought about the flinch. She thought about the way he had stepped forward, one clean step, and about the way both men had decided, without a word being spoken, that they did not want to test what would happen if they stayed. She thought about the 21 nights of walking, and the 22nd, which was tonight, and what she was going to do about what she now knew and could not keep pretending not to know. She began to pack her stall. He waited. When she was ready, she put on her thin shawl. She lifted her basket. She crossed to him. She offered her arm. He found it. They walked home in the rain. Neither of them spoke on the walk. The rain hissed against the stones and dripped from the eaves. The lamps at the corners of the streets guttered and hissed and gave off small pools of gold light. Their footsteps were the only footsteps. When they reached the door of the cobbler's shop, Gideon stopped. "Thank you, Marin." She did not release his arm. "Gideon, yes, come with me." His head turned sharply toward her. It was the first time she had ever heard his surprise. "Come with you where?" "To my room. It is not far. It is warm, and I have soup on the fire, and you are wet through, and it is a cold rain, and it will not let up tonight. Come with me. Eat with me. Then I will walk you back. Marin, I cannot ask this of you. You did not ask. I asked. Come." He was silent for a long moment. The rain fell on his hair. She waited. She did not let go of his hand. "Yes," he said at last. "Thank you." They walked back through the streets the way they had come. His hand rested on her arm. She led him slowly. She led him past the alley she had come from. She led him to the small door of the small house where she had a single room on the ground floor, tucked behind the cooper's shop. She unlocked the door. She led him inside. The room was small. It was clean. A small fire burned low in the little iron grate. A pot of soup, thin but hot, hung from a hook above the fire. A single chair stood by the fire. A narrow bed stood against the wall. A small table held a candle and a book, and a chipped clay cup. That was all. Marin led Gideon to the chair. She helped him sit. She took off her wet shawl and hung it near the fire. She took his stick from him and set it against the wall. "May I take your coat?" she asked. "It is very wet." Yes, she helped him out of the coat. As she pulled the wet grey cloth from his shoulders, she noticed for the first time that the shirt beneath was of fine linen. It was worn, and it was stained at the cuffs, but the cloth itself was the kind of cloth she had only ever seen on the fine gentlemen who came to the market to buy honey cakes. She said nothing. She hung the coat by the fire. She turned back to him. She stopped. Gideon was sitting in her chair, in the small warm room, with his hands folded loosely in his lap. His face was turned toward the fire. And on his face, in the golden light of the flame, she could see something she had not seen before. His pale eyes were not clouded evenly. There was a thin, uneven film on them, as if something had been wiped across them and had begun to dry. Along the lower lashes, the film was cracked, and beneath the crack, where the film had lifted, she could see a small line of dark iris. Not milky, not blind, dark and clear, and very much awake. She stood very still. The fire crackled. The soup steamed. The rain hissed at the small window. "Gideon," she said quietly. "Yes, there is something on your eyes." He went very still. He did not answer. "There is a paste. A film. On your eyes. It has cracked in the warm air. I can see through where it has cracked." Still he did not answer. His hands, folded in his lap, tightened slowly. His shoulders drew in, just a little, and then, slowly, very slowly, he lifted his face. He turned it toward her, and his pale, cracked, false eyes met her real ones, and stayed. The moment stretched. She could hear her own heart beating. She could hear the fire, and the rain, and the distant tick of the small clock on the shelf above the fire. Though she did not remember hearing it before. Time slowed. The room seemed to grow larger and quieter. His face, thin and rain-wet, was turned toward hers with a kind of terrible, steady attention. "Maren," he said. His voice was very low. "Yes, may I sit with this for a moment before I answer?" Yes. He sat with it. She stood before him. She did not move. She did not fill the silence. She waited. He reached up, at last, with both hands, and pressed his fingertips lightly to his eyes. He rubbed them, slowly, in a small circle. When he lowered his hands, his palms had faint whitish smears on them. He looked at them for a moment, and then he lifted his face again. His eyes were dark. They were clear. They were the eyes of a man who had been watching everything for a very long time. They rested on her face. They did not look away. She had known. She had known for 4 days. But knowing it and seeing it were not the same thing, and her breath caught in her throat and would not come out for a long moment. "You are not blind," she said. "No, you have never been blind. No. Every night. For 21 nights. I walked you home. Yes, because I thought you needed me. Yes." Her hands were shaking. She had not noticed until now. She pressed them together in front of her apron to keep them still. She looked at the dark, clear eyes in the thin face, and she felt many things at once, and none of them were what she had expected to feel. She had expected anger. She waited for it. She looked for it inside herself. But the anger, when she found it, was small and far away, like a stone at the bottom of a deep well. What she felt more, what she felt closer to the surface, was a kind of quiet, aching hurt. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. His mouth moved a little, but he did not answer at first. "Why would you do this?" she said. "Why would you sit in the cold every day and pretend? Why would you let me give you my supper? Why would you let me walk you home in the dark when you could see the street better than I could? Maren, please sit. No, please. I owe you an answer. I owe you many answers. But I would like you to sit." She did not sit. She stayed standing. Her hands were still pressed together. "Tell me who you are," she said. He drew a slow breath. He did not lower his eyes. There was no beggar's stoop in him now. He sat straight and quiet, and very still. "My name is Gideon," he said. "That part is true. My full name is Gideon Ashcombe. I hold the title of the Duke of Ashenmore." The words did not fit. She stood in her small room in her wet apron, with her hands pressed together, and she looked at the man in the fine linen shirt under the patched grey coat, and the words did not fit into her small room. They were too large. They belonged somewhere else. They belonged in the fine houses with the carriages and the tall windows. She did not sit down. She did not speak. She only looked at him. "May I explain?" he said quietly. "Yes, I have held the title for 11 years. My father died young. His brother, who was my guardian, was not a kind man. He taught me, in ways I will not detail tonight, that people would lie to my face for what I could give them. That women I did not know would arrange to meet me and pretend to have opinions I did not share. That servants would report my private words to strangers for a coin. That the world would put on a face for me and take that face off the moment I turned my back." He paused. His hand rested on the arm of the chair. His fingers were long. His nails were clean. 6 months ago my uncle died. His widow, who is not my aunt by blood, but who has lived in my house since I was 14, began to arrange things. She invited certain families to visit. She wrote to certain young women. She was in her way trying to see me settled. She meant it kindly. I do not think ill of her for it. But every young woman who came to my house was a young woman who had been told, before she arrived, exactly which door to walk through, and exactly which face to wear. I could not do it any longer. I could not sit at another dinner where every laugh was rehearsed and every question was a hook. So I came here, to this town. My mother came from a village not far from this one. I have distant tenants near here. I told my household I was going to survey them. I told the innkeeper at the crossroads that I was a scholar looking for quiet. I bought this coat and these boots from a farmer for 2 shillings. I mixed a paste from things any traveler could find. I walked into your market square 3 weeks ago because I wanted, for the first time in 11 years, to see how people acted when they did not know I was watching. His eyes moved across her face. They were dark and steady, and she thought, tired. I meant to stay a week. I meant to watch, and to learn something and to go home. On the second day I saw you at your stall. She stood very still. You gave a small boy an apple. You pretended not to see him take it. I was 3 paces away. I saw everything. You lost a penny you needed and you gained nothing. I could not stop thinking about it. On the third day I sat at the fountain and pretended to be a beggar, because if I sat there as myself, no one in this town would ever speak plainly in my hearing again. I wanted to watch you a little longer. I wanted to see if the apple had been a moment or a habit. On the 4th night, you ran to me. You saw a blind man walk into a barrel, and you ran to me. And you lied about your route so that I would let you walk beside me. His voice was very quiet now. Maren, in 11 years, no one has done what you did that night. No one. Not one person in my whole life has walked me home in the dark because they thought I needed help and did not know I could give them anything. They have walked me home because I was rich, or handsome enough, or useful. Never because I was tired and could not see the road. He stopped. The fire cracked. The rain hissed. I meant to tell you, he said. I meant to tell you the 2nd night. I did not. I meant to tell you the 3rd night. I did not. Each night it became harder, because I had begun to know, in a way I had never known before, what it was to be spoken to as if I were only a person, to hear about your day, to hear about the boy who stole the apple, to be given half of your supper by hands that had nothing to spare. He looked down at his own hands, at the faint whitish smear the paste had left on his palms. I told myself I would tell you when I left. I told myself I would leave a letter. I told myself I would leave without a word, and you would forget the strange blind man, and no harm would be done. Each of these was a small lie I told myself. I am telling you the truth of it now. He raised his eyes to hers again. I am sorry, Maren. She had not sat down. She did not sit down now. She stood in the middle of her small room with her hands pressed together, and she looked at him. Many things rose in her. Many small angers, small hurts. Small confused fragments of the 21 nights she had walked him home believing that she was doing a kindness for a man who had less than she had. She thought of the packet of cheese she had pressed into his hand. She thought of the times she had gone to bed hungry so that he would not have to. She thought of the way he had listened to her tell him about the boy with the apple, and how he had already known and had let her tell it again anyway. She wanted to be furious. She waited for the fury. It did not come the way she had expected. What came instead was a small, tired feeling. And then, underneath it, something else. Something she had not thought she would feel at all. She thought of the man at the fountain who had stood up, one clean step, when 2 strangers had tried to take her bread. She thought of the quiet, careful shape of his voice each night when he said, "Tell me about your day." He had lied. He had lied for 3 weeks, but he had also come out of a fine house and sat in the cold and listened to her, night after night, and he had not touched her hand except to rest it lightly on her arm. And he had thanked her for a packet of cheese as if she had given him gold. She drew a slow breath. "You should have told me," she said. Her voice was quiet, and it was steady, but it was not warm. "Yes, you let me feed you, when I had almost nothing. Yes, that was wrong." Yes, he did not argue with her. He did not soften it. He simply agreed. And this, she thought, was the strangest thing of all. "You will eat the soup," she said. He looked at her carefully. "Maren, you do not have to. You will eat the soup. I made it. It will spoil if it is not eaten. Then you will tell me the rest of it. Then I will decide what to do." He inclined his head, slowly. "Yes," he said. She turned to the fire. She lifted the pot. She poured soup into her one chipped bowl. She set it on the small table. She placed the wooden spoon beside it. She did not have a second bowl, so she poured a little into the clay cup for herself. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. because she had no second chair. They ate. He ate slowly. He ate carefully. He ate like a man who had eaten in fine dining rooms all his life, and was choosing, now, to eat like a man who did not deserve to be fed. She saw his hands. She had noticed them before, but not carefully. They were long and clean. The nails were smooth. He had thought to dirty them a little, she saw now, but he had not thought to dirty them enough. She watched him and ate her small portion. Neither of them spoke. When he was finished, he set the bowl down. He folded his hands in his lap. "Ask me anything," he said quietly. She asked. She asked about his uncle. He answered. She asked about his stepmother, or whatever the woman was, and he answered. She asked how old he was. 32. She asked whether he had ever married. He had not. She asked whether he had a mother living. She had died when he was 9. She asked, finally, the question she had not known how to ask. What were you going to do? He was quiet. If tonight had not happened, if I had not seen the paste, what were you going to do? He drew a slow breath. I had told myself I would leave in a week. I had told myself for 4 days that I would leave in a week. I do not think I would have left in a week, Maren. I do not think I would have left. Then what? He looked at her. His dark eyes were very steady. I did not know. I only knew that when I sat at the fountain and heard your step on the stones, something in me sat up, and when you spoke my name, something in me answered before I could stop it. I did not have a plan. That is the worst of it. I did not have a plan, and I let you go on giving me things you could not spare. She looked down at her hands. Where is your house? She said. 2 days' ride from here. You have a horse? I stabled it at the inn at the crossroads, under a false name. And your servants think you are surveying tenants? Yes. Do they know how long? They do not ask. That is one of the small privileges of my position. When I say I will be away, they wait. She sat quietly for a while. The fire crackled. The rain was slowing. The room was warm now. I need to think, she said. Yes, I need you to go home tonight. To the room above the cobbler. I need to be by myself, and I need to think, and I do not want to think while you are sitting in my chair. Yes, I will walk you back. Maren, you do not have to walk me back. It is dark and cold, and I can see the road perfectly well. I know you can. She stood. She looked at him. But I have walked you back for 21 nights. I would like to walk you back tonight also, because tonight I am the one who wants to think, and walking helps me think. And because I have not yet decided what any of this means, and until I decide, I will do what I have done. Do you understand? He looked at her. His face was very still. Something moved behind his eyes. Yes, he said. I understand. She helped him into his coat. She handed him his stick, though she knew now that he did not need it. He took it anyway. She put on her shawl. She banked the fire. She locked her door. They walked through the wet streets in silence. His hand rested on her arm as it always had. She did not look at his face. He did not look at hers. The rain had stopped, but the stones were still wet, and the puddles caught the yellow of the lamps. At the door of the cobbler's shop, he stopped. Maren, yes, whatever you decide. Whatever you decide tomorrow, or the day after, or in a month, I will accept it. I know. I will not come to your stall unless you tell me to. I will not sit at the fountain unless you tell me to. I will not walk beside you unless you tell me to. I know. But I would like to say one thing, if you will let me. Say it. He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her now, dark eyes on her face, and he was not hiding anything. I did not know, he said, what a person was before I met you. I did not know that a person could be a person only without wanting anything from me. I did not know that a person could feed me from her own supper and tell me about a boy who stole an apple and listen to me answer without measuring the answer for how she could use it later. I have been a duke since I was 21 years old, and I did not know. I know now. And I know because of you. Whatever you decide, Marin, I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. I wanted you to hear that from my own mouth before you decided anything else." She looked at him. Her chest hurt. She did not answer him for a long time. "Good night, Gideon," she said at last. "Good night, Marin." She walked home alone. Her feet knew the way. Her mind did not. She did not sleep. She sat by her fire until the coals went grey. She thought about many things. She thought about the cheese she had given him and the time she had gone to bed hungry. She thought about the way his throat had moved when he took the packet. She thought about the boy who had stolen the apple and how Gideon had already known. She thought about a house 2 days' ride from here that she had never seen and could not imagine. She thought about the way he had said, "I did not know what a person was." Toward morning she made her decision. She did not know if it was the right one. She only knew it was hers. The next afternoon, when Gideon appeared at the edge of the square, he did not sit at the fountain. He stood in the small covered walkway across from her stall. He did not wear the paste on his eyes. His face was clean. His coat was still the grey one, because he had no other, but under it, she saw, he wore a fresh linen shirt he must have bought that morning. His stick was gone. He waited. Marin finished with a customer. She wrapped a loaf. She counted change. She took a small breath. Then she looked across the square, and she met his eyes. She did not wave. She did not smile. She simply held his gaze. He crossed to her. He came to stand in front of her stall. Other people were watching now. She could feel eyes on them. He was a strange man in this town, and she was known, and something was happening, and the market square had begun to notice. "Marin," he said. "Gideon." She had rehearsed many things she might say. In the end, she said none of them. She said the one true thing that had risen in her before dawn and had not left her since. "You lied to me," she said. "I did. I do not forgive that yet. I do not ask you to. But I have decided something." "Yes?" She looked at him. She looked at the dark, clear eyes and the thin face, and the careful mouth and the tall shoulders under the poor coat, and she thought about the 21 nights. And she thought about the 22nd, when she had walked him home knowing everything, and she thought about what she wanted her life to be from this day forward. "You have walked into my square as a beggar for 3 weeks, she said. "You have watched me. I did not know I was being watched. That is done. I cannot change it. But if you wish to know me now, you will do it plainly. You will come as yourself. You will sit where I can see you. You will speak to me in your own name and your own voice. You will not put anything on your face or in your coat that is not what you are. Do you understand?" "Yes. And you will not offer me things I have not asked for. No money, no presents, no fine dresses. I am not for buying, and I do not wish to be lifted. If you wish to know me, you will know me here, in this square, at this stall, in the clothes I wear. Yes, and you will listen when I tell you no. If I tell you tomorrow that I do not wish to see you again, you will go, and you will not come back." "Yes," she drew a breath. "That is my condition." He was quiet for a moment. His dark eyes did not leave her face. "I agree to it," he said. "Without argument?" "Without argument." She nodded, slowly, once, and then, because the square was watching, and because her heart was beating hard, and because she did not know what else to do with her hands, she picked up an apple from the basket, and she polished it on her apron, and she held it out to him. "A penny," she said. He took the apple. His fingers brushed hers. He reached into his pocket. He drew out a penny, only a penny, because that was what she had asked for, and he pressed it into her palm. "Thank you," he said. "You are welcome." He bowed slightly, the way any gentleman might bow to any woman in the market. He turned. He walked to the low stone bench at the far side of the square, where an old man usually sat, and he sat down. He did not slouch. He did not stoop. He sat like a man, quietly, in a coat that no longer had to be worn a certain way. He bit into the apple. He watched her over the top of it. Maren went back to her stall. She sold a loaf. She sold 2 apples. Her hands did not shake. Her heart was beating oddly, but it was beating in a good way. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if the town would talk, or if the tall, thin men would come back, or if his stepmother would find him and drag him home, or if he would grow tired of a square with straw in it and go back to his fine dining rooms. She did not know if the small warmth beginning in her chest would grow into something she could name. She did know, however, that she had spoken plainly. She had said what she wanted, and she had watched a duke who had come to her town in disguise because he could not trust anyone, agree to her terms in front of a market full of strangers and not argue about a single one. She glanced across the square. He was still there. He had finished the apple. He had set the core carefully on the bench beside him. He was looking, now, at her. Their eyes met. He inclined his head, very slightly. She inclined hers. Something quiet moved between them. She thought that whatever came next, she would meet it in the way she had learned to meet everything. One step, one loaf, one honest word at a time. She thought that this was perhaps all she had ever wanted. Not a fine house, not a grand carriage. Only a man who would sit where she could see him, and come when she called him, and go when she told him to. She thought, also, though she did not let the thought stay long, that he might yet be that man. She turned to serve the next customer. Across the square, on the low stone bench, the Duke of Ashenmore sat quietly in the pale autumn sun. He did not pretend to be blind. He did not pretend to be poor. He was only a man watching a woman he loved sell bread in a market square. He would sit here tomorrow. He would sit here the day after that. He would sit here every day for as long as she allowed it. He had been given by a woman who had walked him home for 21 nights, believing he had nothing, the first honest gift of his life. He meant to be worthy of it. The wind moved through the square. Somewhere a bell rang for the hour. Somewhere else a child laughed. The smell of bread drifted